Dear friends, welcome to Mysterious Sleep Stories. After a tiring day, tonight we will journey together to a remote corner of Asia, a place where bamboo forests stretch towards misty mountains, ancient paths wind through green corridors of whispering stalks, and a village that vanished without a trace long ago. This is a story about mystery, subtle transitions between worlds, and the infinite patience of nature. So sit back, allow your breath to slow and deepen. Let the stress of the day leave your body, your jaw relax, your shoulders droop, and your mind begin to calm. And as you drift toward this peaceful state, walking along the path through the bamboo forests, perhaps searching for a village that doesn't want to be found, let yourself be carried along with me. Part 1. The Road Through the Bamboo. The bamboo forest exists in a place between worlds. Not quite one country or another, not quite one time or another, but somewhere in the mountainous regions where China meets the sky, where Vietnam's highlands touch the clouds, where the borders of Laos and Myanmar blur into mist and memory. It doesn't matter precisely where, because bamboo forests are everywhere in Asia, and they all share certain qualities. They all whisper. They all remember. They all keep secrets. Imagine, if you will, standing at the edge of such a forest. The sun is setting behind you, casting long golden rays that turn the bamboo stalks into pillars of amber light. The air is cool and carries the scent of earth and green growing things. There's a sweetness to it, almost like tea, and underneath that, something deeper, something ancient like stone and water and time itself. The bamboo rises before you, tall and straight, each stalk as thick as your arm, reaching 30, 40, sometimes 50 feet into the air. The canopy above creates a ceiling of leaves that filters the fading sunlight into a soft, green-tinted glow. This is where our story begins, with a path, a narrow dirt road, really, that leads into the bamboo forest. It's well-worn, packed hard by generations of feet, by cart wheels, by the passage of countless journeys. But it's not a road you'll find on any map. The cartographers never bothered with it, or perhaps they forgot it, or perhaps it simply didn't show up when they were looking. These things happen in mountains where the mist rolls thick and the boundaries between what is and what might be tend to blur. The path curves gently as it enters the forest, and immediately the world changes. The sounds of the outside world fade. The constant hum of modern life, even if it was barely audible before, simply ceases. In its place comes the sound of the bamboo. It's not silent, not at all. Bamboo is never truly silent. It creaks and groans, speaking in wooden voices as the stalks sway in breezes you can barely feel. The leaves rustle with a sound like rain on paper, a soft shushing that seems to whisper secrets in a language just beyond understanding. And sometimes, if you listen very carefully, very quietly, you might hear something else. A melody, perhaps. A song with no words. The bamboo singing to itself, to the earth, to the sky, to whatever spirits might be listening. Walking this path is like walking through a cathedral. The bamboo stalks rise like columns, perfectly spaced by nature's hand, creating aisles and chambers of green shadow. The light that filters through takes on that greenish quality, turning everything soft and dreamlike. The air grows cooler within the forest, refreshing after the warmth of the open land. And there's a moisture to it, a dampness that speaks of shade and hidden springs and the life of the forest floor. Moss grows on some of the older bamboo, and ferns unfurl their delicate fronds in the shadowed spaces between the stalks. Sometimes you'll see orchids, wild and improbable, clinging to the bamboo itself, their flowers like small miracles of color in the green twilight. The path winds on, and as you follow it, you begin to notice things. Small shrines, perhaps tucked into niches between the bamboo. Simple affairs, just a few stones stacked carefully, or a tiny wooden platform with offerings left by travelers. Oranges sometimes left to brown and wither. Sticks of incense, their scent long faded. Scraps of red cloth tied to bamboo stalks. Prayers written on them in characters that time and weather have rendered illegible. These are offerings to the spirits of the forest, to the guardians of the path, to the deities that might watch over travelers in these green corridors between the known world and the unknown. In Chinese folklore, the bamboo is sacred. It represents resilience, flexibility, humility. It bends in the strongest storms, but rarely breaks. It grows quickly, reaching for the sky, but its roots remain deep and interconnected, creating vast underground networks that bind the forest together. The old scholars and poets wrote about bamboo constantly, seeing in it the qualities of the ideal person, the gentleman or lady who remains upright in adversity, who bends with circumstance but doesn't break, who finds strength in flexibility and wisdom in simplicity. In Vietnamese tradition, the bamboo is even more central. The national soul, they say, is like bamboo, hard-working, flexible, optimistic. Village hedges were made of bamboo, creating living walls that protected homes while allowing air and light to pass through. The bamboo was everywhere, in the construction of houses, in the making of tools and baskets and boats, and 1,000 other necessities of daily life. But beyond the practical, beyond even the philosophical, the bamboo holds another place in the hearts of those who live among it. It is a bridge between worlds. In Japanese folklore, there's a story called The Tale of the Bamboo Cutter, where a mysterious, beautiful princess is discovered as a baby living inside a glowing bamboo stalk. She grows to become the most beautiful woman in the land, but eventually reveals herself as not of this earth and returns to the moon, leaving only sorrow and wonder behind. The bamboo in this story is a doorway, a passage between heaven and earth, between the mortal world and the realm of spirits and gods. Thai tradition speaks of forests where half-bird, half-human creatures dwell, magical realms hidden within the bamboo, where the normal rules of reality don't quite apply. The Tsao people of Taiwan have legends of great spirits living in the bamboo forests, guardians who must be honored and respected. And across East Asia, there are countless stories of people who entered bamboo forests and emerged somewhere else entirely, in different times, in different worlds, having encountered things that cannot be explained by the light of common day. This road through the bamboo, the one you're walking now in your mind, this road knows all these stories. It has felt the footsteps of poets and peasants, of monks and merchants, of wanderers and wisdom seekers. And once long ago it led to a small village, tucked deep in the mountains, surrounded on all sides by the bamboo forest. A village where people lived simply and harmoniously, in rhythm with the seasons and the forest and each other. A village that, one night, simply ceased to be. As you walk the path, the bamboo grows thicker, the stalks closer together. The light continues to dim as evening deepens into night, but it's a gentle dimming, not frightening, just a soft transition from one state to another. The path curves and winds, following the natural contours of the land, rising gently as it climbs the mountain. Here and there, small streams cross the path, their water clear and cold, running over smooth stones with a sound like liquid music. The bamboo roots sometimes arch over these streams, creating natural bridges, and ferns grow thick at the water's edge, their fronds drooping gracefully toward the flow. You begin to hear other sounds now. Night sounds. The chirp of insects beginning their evening songs. The distant call of a bird settling into roost. The soft rustle of some small creature moving through the underbrush beneath the bamboo. These are comforting sounds, the sounds of life continuing its eternal cycles, of nature going about its business with a quiet competence that requires no audience and seeks no approval. The air grows cooler still, and a mist begins to form. This is common in mountain bamboo forests, especially at evening. The moisture that the forest holds in its green embrace begins to condense as the temperature drops, creating wisps and curtains of white vapor that drift between the bamboo stalks like ghosts of clouds. It makes the forest even more dreamlike, more unreal. The bamboo appears and disappears in the mist, and the path ahead becomes uncertain, visible only a few feet at a time before fading into white obscurity. But the path is sure beneath your feet. Your body knows where to step, even when your eyes cannot quite see. This is an old path, walked by countless feet over countless years, and it has its own memory, its own sense of direction. You simply follow, one foot in front of the other, breathing in the cool, moist air, listening to the bamboo's endless song, feeling the soft give of earth beneath your steps. And then, gradually, you become aware of something. A change in the air, a change in the sound of the bamboo. There's a quality of openness ahead, a sense that the forest is about to release you into a clearing. The path makes one final turn, and the bamboo falls away on either side, and you step out into an open space. Here, the mist is thicker, lying low across the ground like a white carpet, but rising only to about waist height. Above it, the air is clearer, and you can see the first stars beginning to appear in the deepening blue of the evening sky. The clearing is perhaps a half-mile across, nestled in a natural bowl in the mountains. On all sides, the bamboo forest rises like a living wall, but here in this protected space, there is room for other things. Rice paddies, now long abandoned, their terraces still visible but overgrown with grasses and wild plants. Small fields where vegetables once grew. And in the center, the ghost of a village. Part 2. The village before. Life in harmony. To understand what was lost, we must first understand what was. We must go back in time, back before the mist, before the vanishing, to when this village was alive with the sound of human voices, with the laughter of children, with the crackle of cooking fires, and the smell of evening meals. Let's walk back through the years, back through the decades, to a time when the village was simply a village, and the road through the bamboo was simply a road, and life unfolded with the gentle certainty of seasons. The village had no grand name. Its people simply called it the village when they spoke to each other, and when asked by outsiders, they might say they lived in the bamboo village or the village in the mountains. There were perhaps 80 families living here at its peak, maybe 300 or 400 people in total, spread across several generations. Not a large place by any measure, but large enough to have its own rhythms, its own character, its own sense of community and place. The houses were built in the traditional style of the region, with wooden frames and walls of woven bamboo, thatched roofs that swept low over verandas where people could sit in the cool of evening. Each house was raised on stilts to keep it dry during the monsoon rains, and beneath each house was space for chickens, for storing tools, for all the necessities of rural life. The houses were not built in rows or along streets, not exactly, but rather clustered in family groups, with small paths winding between them, creating an organic, natural pattern that seemed to grow from the land rather than being imposed upon it. In the center of the village was a larger building, the communal house, where meetings were held, where festivals were celebrated, where the elders gathered to discuss matters of importance. It was a beautiful structure, larger than the family homes, with carved wooden pillars and a roof that swept upward at its corners in the elegant style that speaks of mountains and sky. Inside, it was cool and dim, with mats on the floor for sitting and an altar at one end where offerings were made to the ancestors, to the land spirits, to Buddha, or whatever deities the people honored. The village ran on the rhythm of rice. This is true of so many Asian villages, of course. Rice is not just food, it is culture, it is calendar, it is life itself. The year was measured in rice seasons. The flooding of the paddies in spring, the planting of the tender green shoots, the months of careful tending, weeding, ensuring the water level was just right. Then the gradual ripening, the green turning to gold, and finally the harvest, that glorious, exhausting time when every hand was needed to cut the rice, to thresh it, to dry it, to store it. The rice paddies themselves were works of art, carved into the mountainside in elegant terraces that followed the contours of the land. Each terrace was edged with bamboo, natural banks that held the water in when the paddies were flooded and gave way gracefully to the terrace below. The whole system was irrigation engineering of the most sophisticated kind, all done without measurements or blueprints, just generations of knowledge passed from parent to child. But the village was not solely about rice. There were vegetable gardens behind each house, small organized plots where families grew bok choy and Chinese cabbage, ginger and onions, chilies and herbs. There were fruit trees scattered throughout the village, persimmons and pears, plums and pomegranates. And of course, there was the bamboo. The forest provided bamboo shoots in spring, a delicacy that appeared at every meal when they were in season. The people of the village were, by any measure, not wealthy. They had no electricity, no running water piped into homes, no modern conveniences. But they had sufficiency. They had enough. Their lives were hard in many ways, involving long hours of physical labor, but there was a rhythm to the work that made it bearable, even satisfying. The days began early with the first light. Roosters announced the dawn with their raucous calls, and soon after, smoke would begin to rise from cooking fires as breakfast was prepared. Simple fare, usually rice porridge with some pickled vegetables, tea brewed strong and hot. The children would be roused from sleep, faces washed in basins of cold water, hair combed and tied back. Midday was the hottest time, and work in the fields would pause. People would retreat to the shade of their houses, to the coolness under the raised floors. A simple lunch, more rice, perhaps some vegetables stir-fried quickly. Then a rest, a brief escape from the heat. Afternoon work resumed when the worst of the heat had passed, and continued until evening. As the sun began to set, people would return to their homes, tired, but with that good tiredness that comes from honest labor. Children would be sent to draw water from the village well, a gathering place where news was exchanged and gossip shared. Dinner would be prepared, a more substantial meal than lunch, with everyone helping. Evenings were the village's most social time. Once the meal was finished and cleared away, people would emerge from their homes and gather. The children would play in the open spaces between houses, chasing each other in games of tag, or sitting in circles playing with simple toys. The adults would sit in groups, the old men together smoking their pipes, the old women with their handwork, the younger adults sometimes organizing contests or just talking. And there was music, simple music but heartfelt. Someone might bring out a bamboo flute and play melodies that had been passed down for generations. Someone else might sing old songs about love and loss, about mountains and rivers. Sometimes people would dance, simple folk dances where everyone knew the steps. The village had its rhythms, but also its rituals. The lunar calendar governed life here. The new year, falling sometime in late winter or early spring, was the biggest celebration. For days beforehand, every house would be cleaned thoroughly, debts settled, arguments resolved. The night of the new year, families would gather for elaborate feasts. There would be fireworks, loud bangs to scare away evil spirits, bright flashes of color against the night sky. There was the Mid-Autumn Festival, when a moon was at its fullest and brightest, when mooncakes were made and shared. There was the Tomb-Sweeping Festival in spring, when families would visit the graves of ancestors, cleaning the stones, making offerings, maintaining the connection between the living and the dead. The village was not isolated from the outside world, not completely. Once or twice a year, traveling merchants would make their way up the road through the bamboo, bringing goods from the cities. Salt, which the village could not make for itself. Metal tools, cloth. And they would take things in return, bamboo products, mostly baskets and mats and furniture that the villagers had crafted. But that larger world felt distant most of the time. Why would anyone venture far? Everything they needed was here. The forest provided, the fields provided, the community provided. There was a completeness to life here, a sense that the village was its own small universe, complete and sufficient unto itself. The children grew up learning the ways of the village as naturally as they learned to walk and talk. They learned to transplant rice seedlings knee-deep in muddy water. They learned to recognize edible plants in the forest. They learned to weave baskets. They learned the songs and stories, the prayers and rituals, the whole complex web of knowledge that made up village culture. The elders held a special place in village life. Age brought respect automatically. The eldest in each family were treated with particular deference. They were served food first, their opinions asked on important matters. And in return, they served as the village's memory, keeping track of genealogies, remembering old agreements, telling stories that preserved the village's history. One elder in particular stood out in the years before the vanishing. She was called Grandmother May by everyone, whether they were actually related to her or not. She was tiny, shrunken with age, her back curved with decades of field work, her face a landscape of wrinkles. But her eyes were bright and sharp, and her voice, though thin with age, still commanded attention when she spoke. She had seen more than 90 years, she claimed, though no one kept exact track of such things. She remembered events from her childhood that were already history when most of the current villagers were born. Grandmother May spent her days sitting on the veranda of her family's house, watching the village go about its business. Children would stop to show her things they'd found, a pretty stone, an interesting insect, and she would examine each offering seriously, telling them the name of the creature or the type of stone. sharing some piece of knowledge she'd accumulated over a long life. And in the evenings, Grandmother May was the village's storyteller. People would gather around her, sitting at her feet, and she would tell stories. She told stories of the village's founding, of the first families who had climbed the mountain and found this sheltered valley. She told stories of the bamboo forest, of its spirits and guardians, of the proper ways to honor them. She told stories from the old classics, tales of emperors and warriors. And she told stories that seemed to be her own invention, about people who had walked the road through the bamboo and found themselves in strange places, in other times, in realms where the rules of the ordinary world didn't apply. The children loved these stories, of course, wide-eyed at the scary parts, laughing at the funny bits. But the adults listened too, just as intently, because even if they'd heard the stories before, there was something in the telling, in Grandmother May's voice, that made the stories new each time. It was Grandmother May who knew the most about the bamboo forest. She had spent her whole life at its edge, and she knew its moods and seasons as well as anyone. She knew when the bamboo shoots would emerge in spring. She knew where the best bamboo grew for building. She knew the signs that appeared in the forest, the way certain birds sang only before rain. And she knew the forest dangers too. She warned children never to go deep into the forest alone, never to stay after dark. She told of tigers that sometimes came down from the higher mountains, and of wild boar that could be aggressive. But more than the physical dangers, she spoke of spiritual ones. The forest had spirits, she said, and they were not always friendly to humans. Most people dismissed these warnings as superstition, but everyone also, at least partly, believed them, because everyone had experienced something at least once in the bamboo forest. A feeling of being watched when no one was there. A sense that the path had changed. The certainty that you heard your name called, but when you called back, only silence answered. The village's spiritual life was a blend of traditions. There were Buddhist elements, certainly. A small shrine in the communal house held an image of Buddha, and incense was regularly lit there. But older traditions persisted too. Animistic beliefs that predated Buddhism by centuries. The belief that all things had spirits, not just humans and animals, but trees and rocks, streams and mountains. And then there was the specific cult of the bamboo itself. This was unique to the village, something that had developed here over generations of living in intimate contact with the bamboo forest. The villagers believed the bamboo was sacred in a very particular way. It was not just a plant, not just a resource, but a living presence. There was a particular grove of bamboo at the edge of the village that no one cut, ever. It was the sacred grove, the oldest bamboo in the forest. This grove was the site of the village's most important rituals. At the new year, the whole village would process to the sacred grove, carrying offerings of rice, fruit, incense. They would leave these offerings at the base of the largest bamboo, a giant that towered above all the others, and they would bow to it, thanking it for another year of protection. Grandmother May led these ceremonies. She would recite prayers, old words in a language that might have been an archaic form of the local dialect, or might have been something else entirely. No one knew what the words meant exactly, but they had been passed down for generations, and they were believed to be powerful to create a connection between the village and the forest. And the bamboo would respond, or at least people believed it did. Sometimes during the ceremony, a wind would rise, rushing through the bamboo. Sometimes the light would change, the sun breaking through clouds at just the right moment, turning the sacred grove golden. These signs were taken as confirmation that the spirits had heard, had accepted the offerings, had granted their protection for another year. Life in the village was, in many ways, about balance. Balance between work and rest, between community and solitude, between tradition and adaptation, between the human world and the natural world. The villagers were not sentimental about nature. They killed animals for food, cut down bamboo for building. Nature was not something to be preserved in pristine wilderness, but something to be worked with, used, shaped to human needs. But there was also respect, a sense that nature was not simply a resource to be exploited, but a partner. Was it an ideal life? From the outside, with modern eyes, it might seem harsh. The work was hard, the comforts few, the horizons limited. There was no choice in many things. But from the inside, from the perspective of the people living it, it was simply life. And life had its joys. The taste of fresh bamboo shoots in spring. The relief of cool water on a hot day. The laughter of children playing. The satisfaction of a day's work well done. The comfort of familiar faces, familiar places. The beauty of the bamboo forest in morning mist. The peace of evening. The villagers did not think of themselves as unhappy. This was the world as they knew it, and within that world, they found meaning, purpose, connection, and yes, happiness. Not a constant ecstatic happiness, but the quieter satisfaction of a life lived in rhythm with itself and its surroundings. And every night, as families settled into sleep, the bamboo forest stood watch around them. The bamboo that had been there before the village, that would presumably be there long after. The bamboo that creaked and whispered in the darkness, singing its eternal song, keeping its eternal secrets, holding the village in its green embrace. Until, of course, they weren't. Part 3. The bamboo forest, a living entity. Let us step away from the village for a moment, away from the human stories, and into the forest itself. Because to understand what happened, or might have happened, we need to understand a bamboo. Not as background, not as setting, but as character, as presence, as something with its own nature and power. Bamboo is one of nature's most remarkable plants. It is technically a grass, though it grows to heights that rival trees. Some species can grow 3 feet in a single day, making bamboo the fastest growing plant on Earth. This rapid growth is possible because bamboo doesn't grow the way trees do. Instead, bamboo shoots emerge from the ground already at their full diameter and simply extend upward section by section until they reach their full height. This growth pattern gives bamboo an almost magical quality. In spring, when conditions are right, bamboo shoots appear seemingly overnight, pushing up through the soil like green rockets. Walk through a bamboo forest during shooting season, and you can almost see them growing, can certainly hear them, a strange creaking, popping sound as the shoots force their way through the earth. The bamboo in the forest surrounding the village was primarily of the species known as mozo bamboo. These are giants of the bamboo world, capable of reaching heights of 80 feet or more, with culms as thick as 8 inches in diameter. Mozo bamboo grows in dense stands, creating forests that are almost impenetrable except where paths have been cut. The canopy formed by their leaves is thick enough to shade out most undergrowth, so the floor of a mozo bamboo forest is often surprisingly open and clear. Walking through a bamboo forest is unlike walking through any other kind of forest. The straightness of the bamboo creates visual corridors that extend in all directions. The light is transformed by filtering through the canopy, taking on that distinctive green tint. And the sound, always the sound. Bamboo is never silent. The stalks rub against each other in even the slightest breeze, creating a creaking, groaning sound. The leaves rustle constantly, a shushing, whispering sound. The bamboo forest around the village was old, very old. Some of the bamboo in the sacred grove might have been 200 years old or more. Bamboo has a strange relationship with time. Individual culms don't live long by tree standards, perhaps 20 or 30 years before they die and fall, to be replaced by new shoots. But the root system, the rhizome from which all the culms emerge, can live for decades or even centuries. This means that a bamboo forest is, in a very real sense, one massive interconnected entity. All the bamboo you see might be growing from the same root system, making them all clones, all genetically identical, all part of the same living being. The bamboo forest is not a collection of individuals, but a collective, a community so integrated that calling it multiple organisms becomes almost meaningless. It is one vast, spreading living thing. And bamboo has another strange property. Most bamboo species flower only rarely, only once every few decades, or even once a century. And when they do flower, all the bamboo of that species, everywhere in the world, flowers at the same time. It doesn't matter whether the bamboo is growing in China or Chile, whether it's in a hot climate or cold. When the time comes, some internal clock triggers, and all the bamboo of that species flowers simultaneously. This mass flowering is usually followed by the bamboo producing enormous quantities of seed and then dying. The entire forest, all those thousands of stalks, dies within a year or two of flowering. Why bamboo does this is still debated. Some theories suggest it's a defense against predators. Others suggest it's a way of ensuring genetic mixing. But no one fully understands how bamboo keeps time. For the villagers, bamboo flowering was an event of great significance and some dread. It meant the forest would die, would cease to provide for several years. But it was also natural, part of the cycle, and people prepared for it as best they could. But beyond these biological facts, there was the spirit of the bamboo. Whether you believe in such things or not, the people of the village certainly did. They believed the bamboo was alive not just in the biological sense, but in a spiritual sense. They believed it was aware, that it noticed them, that it had intentions and desires and power. There were rules about entering the bamboo forest, unwritten rules that everyone knew. You didn't enter carelessly. You paused at the edge, took a breath, mentally prepared yourself. If you were cutting bamboo, you thanked it first, explained what you needed, promised not to take more than necessary. If you were just passing through, you moved quietly, respectfully. You didn't shout or make unnecessary noise. You didn't litter or show disrespect in any form. And there were places in the forest you simply didn't go. Areas where the bamboo grew in strange patterns, where the air felt different, where stepping off the path seemed dangerous in a way that had nothing to do with physical hazards. These were the bamboo's places, not for humans, and everyone knew it. Grandmother May told stories about these places, about what happened to people who didn't respect the rules. There was a story about a young man, generations ago, who had gone into the forest drunk, shouting and laughing and cutting bamboo carelessly. He had wandered off the path into one of the forbidden areas and was found 3 days later, alive but changed. He couldn't speak about what he'd seen. He never fully recovered, spending the rest of his life with a strange distance in his eyes. There is a story about a group of children who had played a game, running through the bamboo, hiding and seeking. One child had hidden too well, too deep, and the others couldn't find her. They searched until dark, becoming frightened, running back to the village for help. The adults searched all night with torches, but found nothing. Days passed, and everyone assumed the worst. But on the seventh day, the girl walked out of the forest unharmed, even well-fed. She said she'd followed the bamboo music, beautiful music that led her to a place where there were other children, and they played together. But when she tried to describe this place, her words made no sense. These stories, dozens of them, were part of the village's collective memory. They created a framework for understanding the bamboo forest. The forest was generous but also dangerous. It would provide but also demanded respect. It could be a sanctuary but also a trap. It was other, fundamentally other, and had to be treated accordingly. There was a man in the village, Uncle Chun, who could hear bamboo. That's what people said anyway. He would walk into the forest, and he could tell just by listening which bamboo was ready to cut, which would split well, which would make good building material. He never explained how he did this. When asked, he would just shrug and say the bamboo told him. Uncle Chun was quiet, spending more time in the forest than in the village. He never married, living alone in a small house at the edge of the village, closest to the bamboo. In the evenings, people would sometimes see him sitting on his veranda, just listening to the forest, his face peaceful, as if he was hearing a concert no one else could detect. He was the one who maintained the sacred grove, carefully clearing away dead leaves, making sure the space remained open and clean for ceremonies. And he was the one who noticed changes in the forest, subtle shifts in the bamboo's health or growth patterns. He kept a kind of mental map of the entire forest. In the months before the vanishing, Uncle Chun grew quieter than usual. He spent even more time in the forest, and when he returned, he seemed troubled. A few people asked if something was wrong, and he would shake his head, say something vague about the bamboo, being restless, about changes he felt but couldn't quite articulate. The bamboo forest had moods, or so it seemed to those who paid attention. Sometimes it felt welcoming, open, almost friendly. The light would be clear, the paths easy to follow, the sounds comforting. But other times, the forest felt closed, unwelcoming. The light would seem dimmer, the paths would seem to shift. On such days, even routine trips into the forest would be shortened. In the time before the vanishing, the days when the forest felt welcoming became fewer. More and more, people would enter the bamboo and feel that sense of unease. The bamboo seemed taller, darker, the sounds more ominous. People began to hurry through their work in the forest to avoid unnecessary trips. The bamboo was ancient. It had been here long before the village would be here long after. It had witnessed countless seasons, countless generations. From the bamboo's perspective, the village was a recent arrival, a brief moment in its long existence. The humans came, they built, they lived their short lives, and they would go. The bamboo would remain. But something was shifting. The bamboo itself could feel it in whatever way bamboo feels things. A change coming, a disruption. The flowering time was approaching, perhaps. Or perhaps it was something else, some other cycle that existed on timescales beyond human understanding. The bamboo began to sing differently. The change was subtle, but something in the sound of wind through the stalks had changed. It was still beautiful, still soothing, but there was a new note in it, almost a sadness or a warning. Uncle Chin heard it clearly. Grandmother May felt it in her bones, an ache that wasn't quite physical. In those final days, the night sounds of the bamboo changed. People began to report hearing things, music perhaps, or voices, or something that might have been either or both. Some people thought they heard singing, wordless melodies that seemed to come from deep in the forest. Others heard what might have been their names called softly. Most people resisted these impulses, turned over in their beds, went back to sleep. The forest at night was not a place for humans. Whatever sounds they heard were best ignored. Morning would come, and things would be normal again. But the feeling didn't pass. It grew stronger, night by night, the sense that the bamboo was trying to communicate something, to reach out across the barrier between plant and human. Only Grandmother May spoke openly about it. In the evenings, she would talk about the bamboo, about the changes she felt, about the importance of being careful. The bamboo stood, as it always had, green and living and eternal. But now, the village looked at the bamboo differently, with a new wariness, a new awareness of mystery. The comfortable familiarity was gone, replaced by something more primal, a recognition that they lived at the edge of something vast and unknowable. And the bamboo, for its part, continued its life, its growth. But something was approaching, some change or transition, and the bamboo knew it, felt it in its roots and stalks. And whether it was trying to warn the village or simply responding to its own nature, no one could say. The forest waited. The village waited. And night by night, the bamboo sang its strange new song, beautiful and eerie and full of meanings that human minds could barely touch. Part 4. Signs and Omens. In the weeks before the vanishing, strange things began to happen. Not dramatic events, not catastrophes, just oddities, anomalies, things that were slightly wrong, slightly out of place. The kind of things that, looked at individually, mean nothing but taken together, create a pattern, a sense that something is about to shift. It started with the animals. The village had always had animals, of course. Chickens scratching in the dirt beneath the houses, pigs in pens, water buffalo used for plowing the rice paddies, dogs that wandered freely, and cats that kept the rodent population under control. These animals were part of daily life, barely noticed in their normalcy. But the animals began to behave strangely. The chickens became restless, pacing their enclosures instead of settling at dusk, making odd clucking sounds at all hours. The pigs, usually placid, became agitated, squealing for no apparent reason, refusing their food. The water buffalo, those patient beasts that had pulled plows for generations, became skittish, hard to manage, sometimes stopping in the middle of fields and refusing to move, looking toward the bamboo forest with their large dark eyes, as if seeing something their human handlers couldn't perceive. The dogs were worst of all. They began howling at night, not the normal barking at intruders or wildlife, but a long, mournful howling that raised the hair on everyone's necks. During the day, the dogs would congregate at the edge of the village, looking into the bamboo, sometimes whining, sometimes growling low in their throats. They refused to enter the forest, even when chasing game. A rabbit could run into the bamboo, and the dogs would screech to a halt at the forest edge, bark a few times, then slink back to the village, tails down, clearly frightened. Even the cats, normally so independent and unconcerned with human affairs, showed signs of distress. They stayed close to houses instead of roaming, as was their habit. Their ears were always back, their eyes wide and watchful, and they would hiss at nothing, at empty air, at shadows. The village's children noticed this first, of course. Children pay attention to animals in ways adults often don't, having more time to observe, more interest in the non-human world. They began asking questions. Why were the dogs acting strange? What were the cats afraid of? The adults had no good answers, dismissing it as nothing, animals being animals, nothing to worry about. But privately, the adults were worried. Animals often sense things before humans did. Everyone knew that. Dogs barking before earthquakes, birds flying away before storms, chickens refusing to roost before bad weather. If the animals were this disturbed, something was coming. But what? There were no signs of earthquake or storm. The weather, in fact, was eerily calm, day after day of clear skies and gentle breezes. Then there were the dreams. People began having strange dreams, and moreover, they began to realize they were having the same dreams. This is unusual. Dreams are typically private, individual, shaped by personal experience and psychology. But throughout the village, people were dreaming similar things. They dreamed of the bamboo forest, but transformed, changed somehow. In the dreams, the bamboo was taller, or the forest was denser, or the light was different. Many people dreamed of walking in the forest and getting lost, unable to find the path back to the village, wandering in circles among endless bamboo stalks. Others dreamed of hearing music in the forest, following it deeper and deeper, never finding its source. Still others dreamed of the bamboo, itself moving, swaying without wind, or reaching down with its stalks like arms, or opening doors in its smooth sides that led somewhere else, somewhere not quite real. At first, people didn't talk about these dreams, assuming they were personal experiences. But gradually, in the casual conversations that happened while working or in the evenings, references to strange dreams began to emerge. And as people compared notes, they realized the similarities. Not identical dreams, but variations on themes, like a melody played in different keys, but recognizably the same tune. This disturbed people more than they wanted to admit. Shared dreams suggested something beyond individual psychology, something affecting the whole village, some influence or presence that was touching everyone's sleeping minds. Grandmother May, when told about this, nodded gravely. "The bamboo is speaking," she said, "in dreams because we don't listen while awake." But what was it saying? No one could quite answer that. Children began to see things, or at least they claimed to see things. They would point toward the bamboo forest and say they saw lights moving between stalks, or they would insist they saw figures, people or not quite people, standing at the forest edge, watching the village. Adults, looking where the children pointed, saw nothing. This was dismissed as imagination, children being children, playing games or making up stories. But the children insisted. They weren't playing. They really saw these things, and they were frightened, which was unusual. Children are normally fearless about such things, treating ghosts and monsters as fun stories rather than real threats. But these children were genuinely scared, not wanting to play near the forest edge as they always had, reluctant to go outside after dark. The weather became strange, though strange in ways that were hard to pin down. The temperatures were normal for the season, the usual mix of warm days and cool nights. But the air felt different, felt thick somehow, charged, like the atmosphere before a thunderstorm, except no storm came. The sky remained clear day after day, but that pressure in the air never dissipated. And there was the mist. Mist was common enough in the mountains, especially in the morning or evening. But the mist that began to appear was different. It was thicker, for one thing, almost solid, and it had a quality to it, a luminescence, as if it glowed from within. The mist would roll in from the bamboo forest, usually at night, spreading through the village in slow waves, and people waking in the morning would find everything coated in moisture, dripping, gleaming. The mist smelled strange, too. Not the clean smell of normal fog, but something else, something almost sweet, almost floral, but not quite anything anyone could name. It wasn't unpleasant, just strange, just different, just wrong in ways that were hard to articulate. And the mist seemed to muffle sound, to create pockets of silence where even the constant noise of the bamboo was muted, dampened, as if the world was being wrapped in cotton. Uncle Chun stopped going into the forest. This was unprecedented. Uncle Chun always went into the forest every day, had done so for decades. It was his life, his connection, his purpose. But now he stayed in the village, pacing his small house, looking troubled, sometimes standing at the forest edge, but never entering. When people asked why, he would just shake his head. "Not safe," he would mutter. "The bamboo is closed now. Doors are opening, but not for us." No one knew quite what he meant by that, but his refusal to enter the forest was frightening in itself. If Uncle Chun, who knew the bamboo better than anyone, who had spent his life in those green corridors, if he was afraid, then there was real reason for concern. Birds behaved oddly too. Normally, the area around the village was alive with birds, constant background noise of chirps and calls and songs. But the birds grew quiet. They didn't leave, not entirely, but their song stopped. They would perch in trees or on house eaves, watching, silent, as if waiting for something. And the birds that normally nested in the bamboo, small species that made their homes among the stalks, abandoned their nests, leaving eggs unhatched, moving to trees closer to the village, as far from the bamboo as they could get while still remaining near humans. Even the insects changed their behavior. The cicadas, which usually created a deafening chorus in the evening, became silent. Fireflies, which had always danced above the rice paddies at night, disappeared. Instead, other insects appeared, species no one recognized, strange beetles and moths that seemed drawn to houses, clustering on walls, on windows, on doors, as if seeking entry or shelter or something else entirely. Plants showed signs of distress. Gardens that had been thriving began to wither for no apparent reason. The soil was fine, watering was regular, but leaves yellowed and flowers dropped their petals, and vegetables rotted on the vine before they could be harvested. The rice in the paddies was nearly ready for harvest, but it too began to look odd, the grains not filling out as they should, the stalks leaning at strange angles, as if the plants were exhausted or ill. Only the bamboo itself seemed unaffected, or rather, seemed more alive than ever. People reported that the bamboo seemed to glow at night, a faint phosphorescent quality to the stalks, as if they absorbed light during the day and released it after dark. This might have been a trick of the eye, a result of the strange mist and the moonlight, but many people swore they saw it. The bamboo forest limbed in pale light, unearthly and beautiful and terrifying. The sound from the forest intensified. That constant rustle and creak that everyone was so used to grew louder, more varied, more complex. People began to hear definite patterns in the sounds, rhythms that might have been language, melodies that might have been songs. And underneath it all, a deep thrumming, a vibration more felt than heard, that seemed to come from the earth itself, from the vast root system of the bamboo, spreading for miles underground, pulsing with some kind of energy or life force. Grandmother May called a meeting of the village elders. This was done rarely, only for matters of great importance. She explained what she had been feeling, what she had been sensing from the bamboo. She spoke of cycles and patterns, of the way the forest had its own rhythms, rhythms that sometimes aligned with human time and sometimes operated on entirely different scales. She said she believed the bamboo was entering a new phase, a transition of some kind, and that the village needed to be prepared, though prepared for what exactly she couldn't say. The other elders listened respectfully. Some agreed with her, feeling similar unease. Others were skeptical, thinking this was the superstition of old age, the fears of someone who had lived too long and seen too much. But even the skeptics couldn't deny the evidence of their senses. Something was happening. The village felt different, looked different, sounded different. The comfortable, familiar world they had known all their lives was changing into something else. But what could they do? They discussed various options. Should they make offerings to the bamboo spirits, larger offerings than usual, hoping to appease whatever was causing this disturbance? Should they conduct ceremonies, rituals of protection or cleansing? Should they consult with Buddhist monks from the lowlands, seek their wisdom and prayers? Or should they simply wait, trust that whatever was happening would pass, that the forest and the village would return to their normal relationship? In the end, they decided to do several things. They would make special offerings at the sacred grove, a full village ceremony with everyone participating, not just the usual New Year ritual, but something more, something designed to communicate respect and reverence and a desire for harmony. They would also send word to the lowlands, ask if any traveling monks were available to come and bless the village, offer prayers for protection. And they would prepare, practically gathering extra food stores, repairing houses, making sure wells were clean and tools were sharp, basic preparations for any kind of disaster or difficulty. These preparations occupied several days. People threw themselves into the work, grateful to have something concrete to do, some way to feel like they were taking action. The rice harvest was almost ready anyway, so they decided to harvest it early, while the grain was still good, rather than risk waiting. This meant long days in the fields, cutting and threshing and bagging, hard physical work that left everyone exhausted at night. The ceremony at the sacred grove was scheduled for the next new moon, a time considered auspicious for rituals. In the meantime, life continued, with its mixture of normal routine and underlying unease. People went about their work, cared for their families, tried to maintain a sense of normalcy. But the strangeness continued. The mist kept rolling in. The animals remained agitated. The dreams persisted, and the bamboo sang its new song, beautiful and eerie and full of portent. One evening, about a week before the scheduled ceremony, something happened that froze everyone's blood. Just after sunset, as the last light was fading from the sky, a sound came from the bamboo forest. It was loud, unmistakable, undeniable. It was the sound of a gong or a bell, deep and resonant, rolling across the village in waves. Everyone stopped what they were doing, looking toward the forest, listening. The sound came again and again, 9 times in total, each strike clear and powerful, vibrating through the air, through the earth, through bodies felt as much as heard. And then silence. Complete silence. Even the bamboo went still. No rustle, no creak, nothing. The village stood frozen in that silence, hardly breathing, waiting for something else, some explanation, some continuation. But nothing came. After a few minutes, normal sounds began to resume. The bamboo starting its susurration, crickets tentatively chirping. But the spell was broken, or perhaps had been cast, and everyone knew, with a certainty that went beyond logic, that something significant had just happened. Grandmother May, standing on her veranda, had tears running down her wrinkled cheeks. "The announcement," she whispered. "The bamboo has made its announcement." People asked her what she meant, but she just shook her head, too overwhelmed to explain. Uncle Chun, hearing the sound, had fallen to his knees, his face blank with shock or awe or terror or all three. That night, no one slept well. The village lay awake, listening to the darkness, listening to the bamboo, waiting for another sound, another sign. But the forest remained silent, more silent than it had ever been, as if it too was waiting, holding its breath, poised on the edge of something vast and inevitable. And 3 days later, on what would turn out to be the final evening of the village's existence, the mist rolled in thicker than ever before, glowing with its strange internal light, smelling of flowers and earth and something else, something that might have been described as the scent of time itself, or distance, or other places bleeding through into this one. Part 5. The Night of Mist. The final day began like any other, with roosters crowing and cooking fires being lit, with people emerging from their houses to face the day's work. But there was a difference in the air, a quality that made some people pause, made them look around with a vague sense that something was off, though they couldn't quite identify what. The sky was overcast, a solid gray blanket of cloud that sat low over the mountains. This wasn't unusual for the season, but these clouds felt heavy, oppressive, and they seemed to muffle sound, to press down on the village with a weight that was almost physical. The light had a flat quality, shadowless and dim, making it hard to judge the time of day. Morning could have been afternoon. Afternoon could have been evening, all the same gray, unchanging glow. People went about their work, but slowly, with less energy than usual. Everyone felt tired, as if they hadn't slept, even though most had. There was a heaviness in their limbs, a fog in their minds, that made even simple tasks feel difficult. Conversations were muted, people speaking quietly, and not much, as if loud voices would be somehow inappropriate or dangerous. The children were subdued. They didn't play with their usual energy, didn't run or shout or laugh. They stayed close to their parents, to their homes, looking out at the bamboo forest with uneasy eyes. Several children complained of feeling strange, of their heads hurting or their stomachs being upset, though they hadn't eaten anything unusual and showed no signs of actual illness. Animals continued their agitated behavior. The dogs clustered together in the center of the village, refusing to patrol as they normally would, sitting in a tight, nervous pack, whining occasionally, sometimes barking at nothing. The chickens huddled in their coops, even though it was daylight, and they should have been out foraging. The pigs lay still in their pens, not eating, just lying with their eyes open, breathing heavily. Uncle Chin spent the morning sitting on his veranda, staring at the bamboo forest. He hadn't spoken to anyone in days, and when people approached him, he seemed not to notice them, or if he did, he looked through them as if they were transparent. His face had a strange expression, peaceful almost, resigned, as if he had accepted something that others hadn't yet understood. Grandmother May gathered her family around her. She was very weak, having hardly eaten for several days, and she seemed to have aged even more, to have shrunk into herself. But her mind was clear, and she spoke to her children and grandchildren with an urgency that commanded attention. "Remember," she told them, "remember everything I have taught you. Remember the stories, the ceremonies, the proper ways to honor the ancestors and the spirits. Remember that the world is wider and stranger than it seems. Remember that we are guests here, temporary beings in an ancient place." Her family was frightened by this speech, which sounded like a farewell, like someone preparing for death. They tried to reassure her, told her she was fine, that she would live many more years. But she just smiled sadly and patted their hands and said, "I have lived long enough to see wonders. That is more than most get. Whatever comes now, I am ready." The afternoon dragged on, the gray light unchanging, time seeming to slow and stretch. People found it hard to focus on work, hard to concentrate on anything. Many simply sat in their houses or on their verandas, staring at nothing, caught in a strange lassitude that was almost like being drugged. Some people described it later, those few who could describe it, as feeling like moving through water or through a dream where everything was slightly unreal, slightly removed from normal waking consciousness. Evening came, finally, the gray light deepening to a darker gray, though no sun was visible to set. People began preparing dinner, going through the motions more than anything, cooking without much thought, making the simple meals that required no concentration. Families gathered to eat, pushing food around their plates more than actually consuming it, no one having much appetite. And as darkness fell, the mist began. It came from the bamboo forest, as it had been doing for weeks, but tonight it was different. Tonight it rolled in like a living thing, in great billowing waves, thick and white and glowing with that internal luminescence that made it seem almost solid, almost touchable. It poured into the village like water, filling the spaces between houses, rising to cover everything, until the whole village was submerged in white, with only the tops of houses visible, islands in a sea of mist. The mist was warm, body temperature or close to it, and damp, coating everything it touched with moisture. But more than that, it had a quality that affected people, made them feel even more drowsy, more dreamy, as if they were falling asleep while still walking around. People's movements became slow, their thoughts became sluggish, and the line between waking and sleeping began to blur. Some families, feeling this strange influence, went to bed early, simply giving in to the overwhelming desire to sleep. Parents tucked their children in, telling them soft stories, humming lullabies, then lying down themselves, husband and wife side by side, closing their eyes, drifting off into sleep that came easily, immediately, like dropping into a deep well. Other people try to stay awake, to fight the drowsiness, feeling that something important was happening and they should witness it. They sat on their verandas, wrapped in blankets against the mist's clammy embrace, watching the white world around them, listening to the bamboo. And the bamboo was singing, not the normal creaks and rustles, but something else, something that might have been music, actual music, melody and harmony and rhythm, coming from the forest in waves of sound that seemed to materialize from the mist itself. It was beautiful beyond words, this music, impossible to describe, because it wasn't quite like any human music, any instrument or voice anyone had ever heard. It was the sound of growing things, of earth and sky and time itself, made somehow audible, translated into frequencies that human ears could perceive, but human minds could barely process. Those who were still awake listened, captivated, unable to move or speak, just listening, tears running down many faces, though they couldn't have said whether from joy or sorrow or some emotion that had no name. The music seemed to enter through their ears and spread through their whole bodies, vibrating in their bones, in their blood, filling them with something that might have been peace, or might have been surrender, or might have been both at once. And in the mist, shapes began to appear. Or perhaps they had always been there, and only now became visible. Figures tall and slender, moving through the white with a grace that suggested they were not quite walking, not quite floating, but something in between. They were hard to see clearly, the mist making everything indistinct, but they seemed to be heading somewhere, to have purpose and direction, and they moved toward the center of the village, toward the communal house. Some people saw these figures and felt fear, wanted to run, to hide, to escape. But they found they couldn't move, couldn't cry out, could only watch, paralyzed not by magic or force, but by the sheer, overwhelming strangeness of what was happening. Others felt no fear, only curiosity, or even a strange attraction, a desire to follow the figures, to see where they were going, to understand what was happening. The figures reached the communal house and paused there, gathering, dozens of them, perhaps more, hard to count in the shifting mist. And then they began to move again, but now they were moving through the village from house to house, door to door. And as they reached each house, the door would open from inside, and the inhabitants would emerge, whole families, still in their sleeping clothes or wrapped in blankets, moving as if in a dream, following the figures, joining the procession that was forming. Not everyone emerged. Some houses remained closed, their occupants deeply asleep, or perhaps hidden, or perhaps simply not called. But most families came out, drawn by the music, by the mist, by something irresistible that they couldn't name and wouldn't remember later. Children held their parents' hands, walking calmly, not frightened, their faces peaceful, almost happy. Old people moved with surprising ease, their usual aches and pains seemingly forgotten. Everyone walking, following, joining the line that wound through the village and then turned toward the bamboo forest. Uncle Chin stood at his door, watching the procession pass. He didn't join it, didn't move, just watched with that same strange, peaceful expression he'd worn all day. As grandmother May's family passed, she leading them, he raised his hand in a gesture of farewell or blessing or acknowledgement, and she nodded to him, a small smile on her lips, and then she and her family were past, moving on, following the others into the mist. The procession reached the edge of the village, where the bamboo forest began, and paused there for a moment, as if gathering itself, as if making some final preparation. The music from the bamboo swelled, grew louder, more complex, more beautiful. And then the tall figures that had been leading stepped into the forest, and the villagers followed, step by step, family by family, walking into the green corridors between the bamboo stalks, moving deeper and deeper, until they were swallowed by the forest, until they vanished from sight, until only the mist and the music and the bamboo remained. The last person to enter the forest was a young woman, barely more than a girl, who paused at the forest edge and looked back at the village one final time. Her face in that moment showed many things, doubt perhaps, or sorrow, or wonder, or longing, or all of these at once. She stood there for what might have been seconds, or might have been hours, time having become strange and elastic in the mist. And then she too turned and walked into the bamboo, and the forest seemed to close behind her, the stalks moving together, creating a wall of green, solid and impenetrable. And the village was empty. Fires still burned in some houses, smoke rising through thatch roofs. Meals sat half-eaten on tables. Wells held water. Tools lay where they had been set down. Chickens huddled in coops. Dogs lay sleeping in a pack in the center of the village. Everything was there, everything except the people who had walked into the bamboo and not returned. The mist lingered for the rest of the night, thick and glowing, wrapping the empty village in its strange embrace. The bamboo continued to sing, though now its song was softer, quieter, almost like a lullaby for a child who has already fallen asleep. And slowly, gradually, as dawn approached, the mist began to thin, to fade, to retreat back into the forest, until by the time the sun rose, though still hidden behind clouds, it was gone, and the village stood in ordinary gray daylight, empty and silent, as if it had been abandoned for years rather than hours. The chickens began to stir, making their morning noises, confused to find no one coming to feed them. The dogs woke and stood and looked around, seeming disoriented by the absence of humans. And the bamboo forest stood as it always had, green and living and eternal, keeping its secrets, holding its mysteries, silent now except for the normal rustle of leaves and creak of stalks, giving no sign of what it had done, if it had done anything, giving no explanation, no answer, no hint as to where the people had gone or whether they would ever return. And so the night of mist passed into memory, into mystery, into the realm of things that happened but cannot be explained, witnessed by no one who could speak of it, recorded by no one who survived to tell the tale, existing only as inference, as reconstruction, as a story we imagine, because we must imagine something, because the alternative is to have no story at all, only an absence, only a silence, only an empty village where people once lived and then simply didn't. Part 6, Theories and Mysteries. In the days and weeks after the vanishing, when it was discovered that the village was empty, many people came seeking answers. Officials from the regional government trying to determine what had happened to their citizens. Relatives from other villages looking for family members. Curious travelers drawn by rumors of the strange disappearance. They all found the same thing. An abandoned village with no signs of violence, no bodies, no evidence of plague or disaster, just absence. The theories began almost immediately, as theories always do when faced with the inexplicable. Human minds cannot tolerate mystery, cannot accept that events might happen without cause or meaning. So we create explanations, we construct narratives, we tell ourselves stories that make sense of senseless things. The first and most practical theory was that the villagers had simply relocated. Perhaps there had been some kind of economic pressure, some reason to leave that outsiders didn't understand. Maybe they had all decided, collectively, to move to the lowlands, to seek opportunities in growing cities, to abandon the difficult mountain life for something easier. This theory had the advantage of being prosaic, requiring no supernatural elements, fitting within normal human behavior. But it had problems too. Why would an entire village leave overnight, without word to anyone outside? Why would they leave behind their possessions, their animals, their carefully tended fields? Why would there be no trace of where they went, no sign of them settling anywhere else? Investigations were made, inquiries sent to all the surrounding areas, but no group of refugees matching the village's description ever appeared anywhere. If they had relocated, they had done so invisibly, impossibly, vanishing as completely from the broader region as they had from their village. Some suggested disaster, perhaps a landslide or sudden flood that had swept the village away. But the village was intact, undamaged. The houses stood, the fields were fine. There was no evidence of any natural catastrophe. Others proposed disease, perhaps a plague that had killed everyone so quickly there was no time to call for help. But where were the bodies? And plague doesn't make corpses vanish, doesn't explain empty houses with meals still on tables. More sinister theories emerged. Human trafficking, perhaps some criminal organization that had kidnapped the entire village for slave labor or worse. But how would kidnappers manage such a feat? To take 300 people, including children and elderly, without any signs of struggle, without anyone escaping or fighting back, without leaving tracks or evidence. It seemed impossible, yet no more impossible than any other explanation. Some locals, those who lived in surrounding areas and knew of the village's existence, had darker theories, ones that drew on folklore and tradition. The village had been claimed by the mountain, they said, or by the bamboo spirits, or by something else that dwelt in the wild places beyond human civilization. There were precedents, after all, stories passed down through generations of people who had entered forests or mountains and never returned, of communities that had offended the spirits and paid terrible prices. These theories were dismissed by educated people, by those who didn't believe in spirits or gods or any supernatural elements. They were the superstitions of ignorant peasants, nothing more. But those who dismissed such theories couldn't offer any better explanation. The village was empty, the people were gone, and no rational explanation fit the evidence. One theory that gained some traction in certain circles was that the village had been taken by otherworldly beings, by what modern people might call aliens. This theory pointed to the strange lights children had reported seeing in the days before the vanishing, to the odd sounds and mist, to the sudden completeness of the disappearance. Perhaps extraterrestrial beings had abducted the entire village for study or some other unknowable purpose. In Buddhist and Taoist traditions, there are concepts that might help explain or at least contextualize what happened to the village. Buddhism speaks of Maya, illusion, the idea that the world we perceive is not entirely real, that reality is more fluid and mutable than our ordinary consciousness recognizes. From this perspective, the village might not have gone anywhere, might simply have shifted into a different mode of existence, become invisible to ordinary perception while remaining somehow present. Taoism has concepts of hidden realms, places that exist alongside our ordinary world but cannot normally be accessed or perceived. The Taoist immortals were said to retreat to such places, mountain paradises where time moved differently, where the normal rules of life and death didn't apply. Perhaps the village had found its way, deliberately or accidentally, into such a realm, walking through a door that the bamboo had opened, entering a space that was still physically present but dimensionally removed. There's also the concept of liminal spaces, in between places where normal reality becomes fluid. The bamboo forest itself was such a space, a boundary between human civilization and the wild, between the known and unknown. And in certain conditions, during certain times, such boundaries might become permeable, might allow passage between worlds, between states of being. Some scholars of folklore have noted similarities between this vanishing and other reported disappearances throughout history. The Roanoke colony in America, where English settlers vanished, leaving only the word Croton carved into a tree. The Inuit village at Lake Anjikuni in Canada, supposedly found completely deserted with food still cooking over fires. The Chinese village in Fujian province that allegedly disappeared overnight in the Qing dynasty. These parallels suggest either that such events, however improbable, do actually happen under certain rare conditions, or that human imagination, faced with inexplicable absence, tends to fill the gap with similar narratives. Perhaps both are true. Perhaps there are genuine mysteries in the world, events that defy normal explanation, and perhaps we tell similar stories about them because our minds work in similar ways. The concept of the otherworld appears in many cultures. In Celtic tradition, it's Tir na Nog, the land of eternal youth, which could be reached by traveling over water or through mist. In Japanese folklore, it's the realm of the kami, the spirits, which intersects with our world at sacred places. In Chinese tradition, there are the heavenly realms, the courts of the immortals, the pure lands of Buddhist cosmology. All of these speak to a belief that our world is not the only world, that there are other places, other modes of existence, and that under certain circumstances, crossing between them is possible. Perhaps the bamboo forest was such a crossing point, a place where the boundary was thin, where other realms pressed close to our ordinary reality. And perhaps on that night, with the mist and the music and whatever cosmic or spiritual forces were in alignment, the boundary dissolved entirely, and the village, all unknowing or perhaps half-knowing, walked through it, leaving behind the world they had known for a place they had never imagined existed. Uncle Chun, the one villager who didn't disappear, who was found days later still sitting on his veranda, provided no answers. He seemed to have been fundamentally changed by whatever he had witnessed. He could speak, could move, could take care of his basic needs, but he was distant, removed, as if part of him had gone with the others and only a shell remained behind. When asked what happened, he would say only, "They answered the call. The bamboo called, and they answered." Pressed for more detail, he would become agitated, distressed, and eventually stop speaking altogether. He lived for several more years after the vanishing, alone in the village, tending the abandoned houses as if their owners might return at any moment, keeping the sacred grove clear, maintaining the paths. But he never entered the bamboo forest again, never went more than a few steps into its green corridors. And he never stopped listening, sitting on his veranda every evening as darkness fell, his face turned toward the forest, his expression one of waiting, of longing, as if he expected at any moment to hear the call again, the music that would summon him to follow the others into whatever place they had gone. When he died, peacefully in his sleep at a very old age, the village finally became truly abandoned. The few relatives who came to handle his affairs found it too strange, too haunted, to want to remain there or reclaim the land. The village was left to the bamboo, which slowly, inexorably, began to reclaim the cleared spaces, sending up new shoots in what had been rice paddies, spreading into the village itself, nature taking back what had been briefly borrowed. The truth, if there is a truth, remains unknowable. The village disappeared, the people vanished, and what happened to them exists now only in the realm of speculation and story. They might have died, all of them, in some way that left no bodies, no evidence. They might have been taken by people or beings or forces unknown, carried off to some fate we cannot imagine. They might have chosen to leave for reasons we cannot understand, walking willingly into mystery, in a transformation, into an ending or a beginning that lies beyond our ability to comprehend. Or perhaps they're still there, still in the village, still going about their lives, but somehow removed from our perception, existing in a parallel space that occupies the same geographic location, but a different dimension of reality. Perhaps if you could shift your consciousness just slightly, tune your perception to a different frequency, you would see them there cooking dinner, tending fields, telling stories in the evening, living their lives as they always had, unaware that to our eyes they have vanished, that to our world they are gone. The bamboo knows. Of that, everyone who studies this mystery seems certain. The bamboo was there, is still there, and if plants have memory, if they record in their fibers and roots the events that occur in their presence, then the bamboo holds the answer. But bamboo does not speak, not in words we can understand, not in languages we could translate. It whispers and creaks and rustles, singing its eternal song, beautiful and meaningless to human ears, or meaningful in ways we cannot quite grasp, sharing secrets we cannot quite hear. And perhaps that's as it should be. Perhaps some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved, some questions are meant to stay unanswered. Perhaps the vanishing of the bamboo village is one of those events that exists at the edge of human understanding, reminding us that for all our knowledge and science and rational thought, there are still things we cannot explain, still places where certainty fails, and we're left with only wonder, only speculation, only the humbling recognition that the world is stranger and wider and more mysterious than our philosophies have ever dreamed. Part 7. The Search and Discovery and Echoes Through Time. It took 3 days for the village's absence to be noticed by the outside world. The village was remote, after all, visited rarely. But on the 3rd day, a merchant who regularly traded with the village made his way up the mountain road, expecting the usual welcome. He found nothing, or rather, he found everything except people. The village stood silent in the afternoon sunlight. The merchant called out, received no answer, grew concerned. He walked through the village, knocking on doors, looking for anyone. The houses were unlocked. He could see inside, could see the signs of normal life interrupted. Meals half-eaten, beds unmade, clothes laid out as if people had been in the middle of dressing. The chickens were frantic with hunger, making terrible noises. The pigs were agitated in their pens. The dogs greeted him, hungry and thirsty, but frightened. The merchant fed the animals and stayed in the village overnight, uncomfortable, unnerved, sleeping poorly. In the morning, he left quickly, hurrying back down the mountain to report what he had found. The news brought officials, relatives, and curious people. They found the same scene. A thorough search was conducted of the surrounding area. Parties of men walked through the bamboo forest, calling out, looking for any sign of the missing villagers. They found nothing. No bodies, no camps, no indication that anyone had passed through recently. The bamboo stood silent, yielding no secrets. The abandoned village became a source of local fascination and fear. Some people wanted to go there to see the ghost village, but most stayed away, feeling that the place was cursed or haunted. Ghost stories began to circulate, tales of people who had gone to the village and heard voices, or seen figures moving in the houses, or felt hands touching them from empty air. One particularly detailed account came from a group of young men who spent a night in the village several months after the disappearance. As darkness fell, they began to hear things. Footsteps outside, though when they looked, no one was there. Voices, distant but distinct, speaking in conversation. And music, faint but unmistakable, coming from the direction of the bamboo forest. One of the young men decided to follow the music. He walked out into the night, toward the forest edge, while his companions called after him to come back. He paused at the forest edge, listening, and then, without a word, walked into the bamboo and disappeared. The others waited for him to return, but he didn't. Eventually, fear overcame them, and they fled. The young man who had walked into the forest was never seen again. This incident only reinforced the village's reputation as a dangerous place. Over the years, nature began reclaiming the village. The bamboo sent shoots into the cleared areas. Without human tending, the rice paddies became swamps, then meadows, then scrubland. The houses, without maintenance, began to decay. Thatch roofs grew thin, walls weathered and sagged, floors rotted. Vines crept up walls. Birds nested in eaves. Small animals made homes in corners. But the decay was slow, strangely slow, as if the village resisted its dissolution. Even decades later, after Uncle Chun died and there was truly no one left, the village remained recognizable, the houses still standing, as if waiting, as if the bamboo had decided to preserve rather than destroy. Occasionally, people still visited. Researchers, folklorists, travelers with a taste for the eerie and strange. They would walk through the quiet village, photograph the decaying houses, try to imagine what life had been like. Some reported feeling sadness, a profound melancholy that seemed to emanate from the place itself. Others felt peace, a strange, serene quality to the abandonment. The items left behind provided small insights into the lives that had been lived there. In one house, a meal sat on a low table, rice and vegetables, now long spoiled but still recognizable. In another, a child's toy, a small wooden horse, sat in a corner. In a third house, clothing lay folded neatly, prepared for the next day's work that would never be done. One house contained something unusual, a journal kept by one of the villagers, a woman who had learned to write. The journal was discovered years later, its pages yellowed and moisture damaged, but still mostly readable. It provided a window into the village's final days, describing the strange occurrences, the unsettling feelings, the growing sense that something was changing. The last entry, written on the day of the vanishing, was brief, almost cryptic. "The bamboo is calling us," it said. "I can hear it now, clear as my own thoughts. It is beautiful, the sound it makes. I don't know what it means, but I feel I must answer. I must go. We all must go. The forest has opened a door, and we are invited to step through. I am afraid, yes, but also curious. What lies beyond? What waits in the bamboo's heart? I suppose I will know soon." If anyone finds this, if anyone reads these words, please know that we went willingly, that we were not taken but called, and we answered, "Remember us." And that was all. The journal ended there. The empty village did not fade from memory as quickly as empty places usually do. Something about its story captured people's imaginations, worked its way into the region's folklore, became one of those tales that's passed down, changed and embellished with each telling, but retaining always its essential mystery. In the immediate aftermath, the vanishing was a local scandal. But as years passed, as the generation that had known the villagers died off, the story became more abstract, less about real people and more about a parable, a cautionary tale, a ghost story to be told on dark nights. The story spread beyond the local region, picked up by travelers and traders who carried it to distant provinces and countries. Each telling added new details, removed others. In some versions, the village had been wicked, had offended the mountain spirits, and the vanishing was divine punishment. In other versions, the village had been so pure and harmonious that they were taken to paradise. But the core of the story, the essential mystery of an entire village vanishing without trace, remained constant through all the variations. And that core kept the story alive, kept people telling it, kept each new generation wondering what really happened. Part 8. The Bamboo Remembers. The bamboo forest stands today as it has stood for millennia. The village is gone now, truly gone, reclaimed entirely by nature. Where houses once stood, bamboo now grows. Where rice paddies terrace the hillside, wild grasses wave. Where paths wound between homes, ferns unfurl in deep shade. The physical traces of human habitation have been almost entirely erased, but the bamboo remembers. Or so it seems to those who walk the old road, who venture into the forest, who sit in the clearing where the village once was. There's a quality to the place, a feeling that's hard to name. Not exactly haunted, not exactly sad, but something. A presence, a weight to the air. A sense that what happened here left an impression, a mark on the fabric of reality that time alone cannot erase. The bamboo grows as it always has, sending up new shoots in spring, the old stalks dying and falling, the eternal cycle of growth and decay continuing without pause. Birds nest in its canopy. Insects make their homes between its stalks. Small animals forage through the undergrowth. Life goes on, as life always does, indifferent to human dramas, concerned only with the eternal business of living and dying and living again. But sometimes, according to those who visit, the bamboo speaks. Not in words, of course, but in that constant susurration of leaves, in that creaking of stalks. There are patterns, rhythms, something that sounds almost like language, almost like music, almost like a story being told to anyone who will listen. People who spend time in the clearing report strange experiences, dreams that feel more real than dreams should, a sense of being watched by benevolent eyes, occasional glimpses of movement at the edge of vision that disappears when directly observed. The feeling that if they could just tune their perception slightly, shift their consciousness just a little, they might see what really happened here, might witness the village as it was, might understand the mystery. The mist still comes, rolling out of the bamboo forest on certain nights. Not every night, not even most nights, but sometimes when conditions are right, when the moon is in a certain phase, when the season is turning, when the boundary between what is and what might be grows thin. On those nights, the mist glows with that same strange internal light, and the bamboo sings its beautiful, eerie song. Local people avoid the area on such nights. They've learned through long experience that the bamboo forest during mist is not a place for humans. Whatever happened to the village, whatever doorway opened that night long ago, sometimes that door opens again, just a crack, just enough for the attentive to sense it. But the door doesn't beckon as it once did. Or perhaps it does, but to a different audience in a different way. The bamboo's call is quieter now, more subtle. It doesn't summon entire villages. It doesn't compel. It simply offers a possibility. A question, an invitation that can be declined. The bamboo forest has returned to its ancient patience. It has absorbed the village, taken it back into itself, made it part of its long memory. And it continues its life, its slow, patient existence that operates on timescales human minds can barely grasp. To the bamboo, the village was a moment, a brief intersection of human and plant, of culture and nature. The moment has passed. The bamboo remains. And in that remaining, in that eternal green presence, there is a kind of peace. The bamboo doesn't mourn the vanished village. The bamboo doesn't wonder what became of the people who walked into its corridors that misty night. The bamboo simply is existing in its own mode of being utterly itself, utterly present, a living bridge between earth and sky, between past and future, between the world we know and the worlds we cannot quite imagine. And so our journey through the bamboo comes to an end. We've walked the old path together, you and I. We've seen the village as it was, alive and thriving, a small human community finding its place in the embrace of the ancient forest. We've witnessed the signs and omens that preceded the vanishing. We've stood in the mist on that final night, watching as the villagers answered a call we cannot hear, stepping through a doorway we cannot see, walking into mystery. We've explored theories, pondered possibilities, acknowledged that some questions have no answers that satisfy the rational mind. We've watched as the years passed, as the empty village slowly returned to the forest, as the bamboo reclaimed what had always been its domain. And now, here at the end of our story, perhaps we can find some peace in the not knowing. Because the bamboo village's greatest gift to us might be exactly this. The reminder that mystery still exists, that wonder is still possible, that for all our knowledge and technology and rational understanding, the world remains larger and stranger than we can fully comprehend. Take a deep breath now. Feel your body relaxing, sinking deeper into rest. Let your mind release its grip on the story, on the questions, on the need to understand. Just be here now in this moment, breathing slowly, calmly, peacefully. The bamboo stands in the darkness, whispering its eternal song. It has stood for thousands of years. It will stand for thousands more. Its patience is infinite. Its secrets are safe. And in its presence, we can find our own peace, our own rest. Let yourself drift now. Let the images of the story fade into the background of your consciousness. The green corridors of bamboo, the mist rolling through the forest, the music that might have been wind or might have been something more. Let it all become soft, distant, dreamlike. Breathe in through your nose, slowly, deeply. Hold for a moment. Release through your mouth, even more slowly. Feel your body growing heavier, more relaxed. Your mind growing quieter, stiller. The village is at peace. The bamboo is at peace. And you too can be at peace. Sleep now, traveler. Rest in the knowledge that mysteries don't need to be solved to be beautiful, that some stories are meant to be felt rather than understood, that in the spaces between what we know and what we cannot know, there is room for wonder, for imagination, for the sweet release of sleep. The bamboo watches over you. The mist cradles you. The ancient forest holds you safe. Sleep, dream, rest. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey through the bamboo forest. I hope this story has helped you find the peace and relaxation you were looking for tonight. This is Mystic Sleep Tales, and we're here to help you unwind from a busy day and stress, drifting off into a restful sleep with the rhythm of mysterious and timeless events. If you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing to our channel and turning on notifications so you never miss a new one. Your support means everything to us and helps us continue creating these peaceful journeys for you. I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Where are you listening from tonight? What time is it where you are? Are you in bed, ready to sleep, or listening during a quiet moment of your day? And most importantly, what stories or mysteries would you like to explore in the next episode? Do you have any suggestions for future episodes? Perhaps a place that fascinates you, a mystery that intrigues you, or a type of story that brings you peace. Your feedback and suggestions help us shape what we create, and knowing where you come from and what resonates with you is what truly makes this community special. Until next time, may your dreams be peaceful, your sleep deep, and your rest complete. Remember, tomorrow is the first day of the rest of your life. Good night from Mystic Sleep Tales. Sweet dreams.